guys. What's what's up? It's been a while since I got on here and made a video. Guys, there is a perfectly reasonable explanation to why I have been gone for the last 2 weeks. I needed a break.
We do not care.
No, but seriously, I realized I was starting to feel a little burnt out. I didn't want to get to that point, so I decided to take a couple of weeks off. I went to go see some friends and travel a bit, and so now I'm feeling energized and ready to get back into this. We got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to start off and kind of ease my way back into it with part 3 of our Ichigo's Powers Explained series. In our first video, we talked primarily about Ichigo's Shinigami powers during the Soul Society arc, and then in our second video, we talked about Ichigo's Hollow powers during the Hueco Mundo and Arrancar arcs. Today, we are going to be looking at DANGAI Ichigo and what happens when those two powers collide. So without further ado, this is DANGAI Ichigo Explained. After his absolutely iconic battle with Ulquiorra in Hueco Mundo, Ichigo returns to face Aizen, with everyone believing he is the only one who can because he's never seen Kyoka Suigetsu and has never been put under Aizen's spell. As we all know, he fails miserably and Aizen manages to get in his head, telling him that he's kind of planned his whole life up to this point, all of his battles, and even knows the truth of his heritage. This is when Isshin and the others step in and Aizen begins to merge with the Hogyoku as he battles them. Aizen then begins to ascend beyond Shinigami and Hollow and defeats Isshin, Yoruichi, Urahara, and even Gin at this point. And because Aizen kind of exists on a plane beyond Shinigami at this point, everyone becomes unable to sense his spiritual pressure in these forms, similar to how a two-dimensional being cannot truly perceive a three-dimensional being. I love that video with Carl Sagan where he kind of explains how the 4th and 5th dimensions work, and how he explains that a two-dimensional being can kind of perceive a three-dimensional being when they overlap with their plane, so they can see them sometimes, but they can't fully understand what they're looking at. That's kind of the deal with Aizen in these forms. They can see him, but they can't truly comprehend what he is, and that kind of translates to them being unable to read his spiritual pressure anymore. He's just that far beyond them. And it's at this point that Isshin, Ichigo's father, makes a crucial discovery. Ichigo is the only person who can still sense Aizen's spiritual pressure in these forms. Now, this is huge, because one thing we already know about Ichigo is that he possesses both Shinigami and Hollow powers. So, him being able to sense Aizen after he's transcended the boundary between Soul Reaper and Hollow suggests that Ichigo is also on that tier of power, he just doesn't know it yet. And it's at this point that Isshin suggests the biggest Deus Ex butt pull in all of Bleach, the final Getsuga Tensho. Now, I call it a butt pull because most Bleach fans know this power came out of absolutely nowhere, and even though it's freaking awesome to see on screen, they really didn't build up to it at all. How does Isshin know about it? None of that is ever explained. But, for the sake of this video, I'm gonna assume we all know this and move on. Somehow, Isshin knows about the final Getsuga Tensho and has possibly attempted it at one point, being rejected by Engetsu. I say that because Isshin seems to know that his Zanpakuto will not want to teach him its technique, similar to how Engetsu didn't want to teach it to him, meaning he's tried it before. So he takes Ichigo to the Dangai, also known as the Hyperbolic Time Chamber from Dragon Ball Z, and he makes space for Ichigo to train in his inner world and attempt to learn the final Getsuga Tensho. Now here's where we get to the explanation of what Dangai Ichigo really is. The way I see it, there are two major components to Dangai Ichigo. The first component is his transcendent nature. Similar to Aizen, Ichigo's spiritual pressure becomes unreadable in this form, even to Aizen himself, having ascended beyond Shinigami and Hollow. We are led to believe at this point in the story that this is represented by Tensa, Zangetsu, and White merging to become one insanely powerful being. I say we are led to believe because, spoiler alert, we later learn that Tensa Zangetsu is actually the manifestation of Ichigo's latent Quincy abilities, and White is his Shinigami and Hollow powers. So both entities merging actually represents all of his powers coming together. Looking back, I believe this is why Ichigo is able to ascend to an even higher level than Aizen, though it was unknown to us at the time. He didn't just fuse Shinigami and Hollow, but Quincy as well. The irony of this form is that Aizen spent over 100 years trying to become a god, scheming and backstabbing for decades, while Ichigo naturally possesses all of these things within him, because of Aizen no less. The second aspect of this form is the final Getsuga Tensho itself. If the nature of the Getsuga Tensho is to absorb spiritual pressure and release it in a condensed, weaponized form, This is that taken to its ultimate level. He becomes Getsuga itself. Ichigo essentially consolidates all of his Soul Reaper powers, which we now know would include his other powers as well, and fire it off as one devastating attack, at the cost of all of his powers. This is Mugetsu. Now, this is where we get into some tinfoil hat territory, so
hold on to your butts.
Spoiler territory ahead. Knowing what we know later on about Ichigo's Quincy heritage and Old Man Zangetsu's role in all of that, as well as Old Man Zangetsu making himself the center of Ichigo's powers, isn't it interesting that Ichigo in this form has long black hair, red eyes, and black, shadowy spiritual pressure? If that sounds familiar, it's because that's a pretty accurate description of Yuha.
What do you mean by that?
Just hear me out. Since we know that Old Man Zangetsu is a younger version of him in appearance, and Ichigo's Quincy powers that suppressed his other powers and made himself the center, this leads me to believe that the final Getsuga Tensho is Ichigo's quote-unquote ultimate Quincy form of sorts. Don't take this too literally, I'm just spitballing here. But we never see Ichigo really use his Quincy powers in full. We see him merge with his inner hollow and get his true Zanpakuto later, but he never uses his Quincy abilities to their full. Ichigo merging with his Zanpakuto and becoming the embodiment of his Shinigami powers, which at this point is primarily Old Man Zangetsu aided by White, it makes sense to me that his form would heavily resemble Yuha. In general, DANGAI Ichigo has been an enigma to Bleach fans for years, because it really feels like Kubo was leaning into the truth of Ichigo's heritage here before we even knew what it was. At the time, we were just amazed at how freaking cool this form looked and how effortlessly Ichigo humiliated Aizen. Looking back, it seems like there was more to this form than we originally thought. It's also worth noting that I don't believe the physical changes we see in Ichigo before he activates the final Getsuga Tensho are anything more than just the result of him spending 3 months in training. He's taller, he's more muscular, his hair is longer, and Tensa Zangetsu has wrapped around his arm. We call that DANGAI Ichigo as a separate form because that's how we talk about it as fans, but I simply think that's just indicative of the passing of time. The actual form itself is the long black hair that we see later, just in case that wasn't clear for anybody. I also just want to point out that in this form, Ichigo's physical strength is monstrous. Ichigo's basic strikes and swings become so powerful that he can vaporize mountains when he clashes with Aizen, as well as absolutely decimate a full power Haro 90 Kurohitsugi from Aizen, full incantation, with no problems. This led Aizen to mistakenly believe that Ichigo transformed all of his spiritual pressure into physical capability, which is really dumb, but that's the only explanation he had for how Ichigo was that powerful without being more powerful than him. But as Aizen would soon come to figure out, Ichigo is just that much more powerful than him at this point. Sucks to be Aizen, I guess. Anyways guys, that is going to do it for this. Thank you so much for joining me after my 2-week break. I know these videos really don't get as much attention as my other ones, but I really enjoy making these videos and I enjoy going through our first ever series on the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think about DANGAI Ichigo and the final Getsuga Tensho and how his heritage works into that. I would be really glad to know your guys' theories down in the comments. As always, these are just my opinions and thoughts as I'm watching the show as a fan. Please like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell so that I know you guys are vibing with this content and we can keep pushing it out. There's a lot happening in the nerd world, so keep your notifications on and keep checking the channel. And if you guys are ready, I'll see you in the next one. Peace!